Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the ENSign podcast. We are going to continue with our tax audit series today. A few episodes ago, we treated pitfalls to avoid in tax audits. Today, we will treat pitfalls to avoid after receiving a final tax assessment. Our guest today who returns to the hot seat is Cletus Banseh. He is a partner at ENS Ghana, and he is in the finance and tax team. Cletus, welcome back to the hot seat.
Thank you, David. Happy to be back.
I'm glad you are.
With the tax audit series.
Cletus, let's not start with law and tax. What in the world is arresting your attention these days?
David, whenever I'm not involved in legal work, I enjoy international politics. I follow what is going on across the globe. For example, the situation in Israel and Palestine, the situation in the US, elections in South Africa, and then India.
Okay. What's happening in New York? I know you were intentionally vague about the US. Cletus, what do you think about what's going on in New York?
Well, in New York, we are witnessing the last phase of a contentious trial. I hope they are able to resolve their issues peacefully.
Peacefully. All right. So much for icebreakers. Let's get the ball rolling. Looking at the topic, Cletus, I guess I'll start with a definition. So what's a final tax assessment and what does it look like? When you receive it, what will tell you that it is a final tax assessment?
From the name itself, a final tax assessment is the final decision of the Commissioner General in relation to the tax liability or tax affairs or status of a taxpayer. So usually it moves from the draft phase into the final phase where the Commissioner General now tells the taxpayer that this is your tax liability. And
So what does it look like?
Yes.
Will you get a document? What will be written on it?
It usually comes in the form of a report, and
Okay.
It's on the letterhead of the Ghana Revenue Authority.
Okay.
On the face of it, you will find that it states a final audit report or a final assessment. Usually when it doesn't state on the face of it as final audit report or final assessment,
Yeah.
you need to take immediate steps to check with the tax authorities, and I would suggest that in writing to confirm whether this is a final assessment. And before you even write, assume that it is a final assessment and start looking at it whilst you wait for.
All right. So let's say it's a final tax assessment. What can or should one do immediately if they are unhappy with the assessment?
When you receive a final assessment from the Commissioner General or from the Ghana Revenue Authority, you need to take it very seriously. You have only 30 days to take a decision whether if you disagree with that assessment. And if you disagree, you are entitled to lodge an objection against that assessment within 30 days from the date that you have received notice of that assessment. If you don't object outside within the 30-day period, then you are out of time and that assessment becomes final and you can't challenge it.
All right, we will come down to what form the objection takes further down. But I also know that there's a famous 30% deposit or down payment to be made before an objection. What's that all about?
That 30% down payment has become a contentious issue in Ghana and even other countries. So usually when a taxpayer decides to object to a tax assessment, the requirement is that You pay all your outstanding tax liability. If the assessment relates to custom duty, then you have to pay the entire assessment or the amount. And then, but if the assessment relates to other taxes, what you do is you pay all your outstanding tax liability and 30% of the tax in dispute in order to have the Commissioner General entertain that objection. Otherwise, the Commissioner General, you will not have a valid objection before the Commissioner General.
Are there any circumstances under which the 30% deposit or down payment may be waived, suspended, something like that?
Yes, David, the law allows taxpayers who have valid justifications to apply to the Commissioner General to seek for a waiver, a variation or suspension of that 30% down payment, and to have their objections reviewed or entertained by the Commissioner General. But you must have a very solid reason. For example, if there's a glaring mathematical error or on the face of the assessment, it is just erroneous, then everybody can see on in the face of it, then you should be able to apply to the Commissioner General to waive or vary. In practice, you usually find the Commissioner General varying the 30% deposit, reducing it from 30% to maybe 15 or 20. But there may be times where he can waive it.
Okay. So we've talked about a 30-day rule. We've talked about a 30% down payment rule. Assuming that both of these rules have been observed, all other rules have been observed, and the objection is on foot, what happens in the objection proceedings? Let me put it this in another way. In what form do you object? Do you drive up to the door of the GRA or the Commissioner General to say, I object with a gavel in your hands? Do you write a letter? Is there a specific form you fill? How do you do the objection? And beyond that, do any proceedings take place?
The objection is required to be in writing, and you must state precisely the grounds on which you object to the tax assessment. And on your point that you address it to the Commissioner General, if you address it to the Commissioner, Domestic Tax Revenue Division.
That's the administrative head of the Revenue Authority, isn't it?
Yes, David, that's the head. And if you address it, you have an objection before the Commissioner General.
Okay. And how is the objection actually done? Do you meet the Commissioner General? Is there a committee you meet, or is there no meeting at all? Essentially,
David, if you have a valid objection before the Commissioner General, and I say valid because if you have paid your 30% and you have lodged your objection within the 30-day period, then you have a valid objection before the Commissioner General. The Commissioner General has 60 days to take a decision on that objection. But before that period, the Commissioner General may refer the objection to what is now commonly described as the Objections Committee,
yeah, I've heard about that.
GRA. Yeah. And they may call the tax objector to appear and provide more documents or explain to allow them arrive at a fair decision on the objection.
So it sounds like a fairly constructed, as in a fairly structured process, the objection.
Yes, it's well structured, except that if after the 60-day period, the Commissioner General doesn't issue a decision on the objection, the taxpayer has an option to write to the Commissioner General and inform the Commissioner General that he wants to elect to proceed to the next phase. And that election means that the objection has been disallowed.
Or will be treated as having been
disallowed. Okay. So the taxpayer, then after 30 days of notifying the Commissioner General of that election, then the taxpayer can proceed.
Okay. So it's looking like a good place to stop on this second in the line of series, but maybe one more question, Cletus. assuming there is a decision on the objection within the 60-day time limit you just talked about, and one still feels hard done by, is there any way to seek further redress?
Yes, the law provides a further avenue where the tax objector can move to. You can move to what we call the Independent Tax Appeals Board to decide on the decision of the Commissioner General.
The Independent Tax Appeal Board is another interesting development in our law, which is going through, shall we say, growing pains. And there's so much to discuss under that. I think we probably should stop here and reserve that for an episode on its own. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. It's the Independent Tax Appeals Board is a newly established tribunal, and there are very interesting issues around it. And in our next series, we'll go into details about it.
Well, thank you very much, Cletus, for joining us again on this second part of the series on tax assessments and the procedure for redress. And thanks, listeners, for joining us on this episode of the ENSign podcast. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, David.